Welcome to another episode of the Gooner Fanzine Arsenal Woman podcast. We've got a mix of news as we seem to have every week, but we're going to start, Daisy, with the bad news. Yet another ACL injury for Arsenal. It was hinted at by Mark Parsons, the Netherlands coach, the other week, who was very concerned when this player went off injured, and Victoria Pelova a lot of months on the sidelines to come. It just doesn't stop, does it? Just when you think you've got all the players back from ACLs, another injury hits. It's just a stark reminder of just how tough it is at the moment in the women's game.
Yeah, major issue, isn't it? We've talked about this so much, like the problem and how we need to address it, and then we, as soon as we're trying to sort of talk about that, another thing like this happens. So we were quite optimistic, weren't we, about next season? Obviously, a new squad and bringing new people in, and kind of obviously, if we take Pullover for example, what a season she's had at Arsenal, definitely, really broke through at the start of the season and done really well and sort of cemented a place in that team. And obviously got into any individual who has that happen to them in their career. And the fact that we're coming to this situation and starting to feel like it's the norm and we're kind of expecting it, that kind of talk like that kind of shows, doesn't it, the severity of the situation and just kind of how bad it really is.
Yeah, sustained it on international duty, as we talked about last week, playing for the Netherlands against Finland on the 4th of June. Substituted 12 minutes in after a knee injury. We could tell sort of straight away it was one of those that could definitely come under the ACL category just by watching on the video clips that came out. She underwent testing straight away to determine the injury, and it's obviously taken a little while. They've taken their time with the testing and put the news out today. Arsenal saying Victoria Pelova will undergo surgery in due course and will be sidelined for an extended period. Everyone at the club will now be supporting Victoria through her recovery and return to action. We've seen her teammates have got around her today, fans as always on social media as well. I mean, do you think it's any easier for players now to make this ACL journey, that the whole injury, the recovery process, because they've seen the likes of Mead, Williamson, Wienroither, Miedemar, they've got these players now to talk to and help them through the journey. With every ACL that happens as well, Arsenal, the coaches, the physios, all of that team as well, think of the mental side of things. Do you think it will get easier now, that recovery journey for a player like Pelova, because of those who essentially have been unfortunate enough to do it before her?
In terms of physical recovery and obviously learning as we go about how to deal with those kind of injuries, I definitely, that is unfortunately the one maybe positive of having more case studies and to look at. But I think in terms of the psychological side of that, that probably never gets easier. Obviously, especially with how long you're out of the game and sort of how the game changes sort of in the time that you're gone. It's such a difficult thing to manage, mentally. And obviously she'll have support in the club. She'll have support from people who, who have gone through a similar situation. But when, we know with all the ACL injuries that we had at Arsenal, all they said was they just missed playing football. They just, had to sort of watch from the sidelines and not be able to do anything. And Leah Williamson also talked, I know we'll probably get into this in her Oxford Union address. She said how, we've still got a long way to go in terms of ACL research, in terms of getting the right facilities, because even if we're getting that at the top clubs, what's happening at the clubs below Arsenal and how can we sort of address that? And if it's happening so often, why do we feel like we're getting nowhere in progress? And why are we going into every game and every international game scared? Anytime a player goes down, because we might think that they'll miss the next year or the next season off of football. That's just not the situation that we want to be in at all.
We'll come on to what it means to the Arsenal squad, because Palova's been absolutely superb. She signed in January 2023, and she's really, really become a mainstay in the Arsenal team. She was one of the top sort of performers last season, played more minutes than a lot of other players as well, and then's obviously gone straight to Australia, straight into international duty, and it's probably another example of where scheduling has been less than ideal. But the ACL injury since 2022, just for this sample size, twice for Taya Goldie, Beth Mead, Viv Miedemar, Leah Williamson, Laura Wienroither, Kaylin Marquise, and now Victoria Pelova. Now, out of those, only Mead, Miedemar, Williamson, and Wienroither, all in one season, of course, all happened playing for Arsenal. The others were, I think, one of Goldie's was sort of in training. I think one was with Watford. Pelova, obviously, recently, Marquise with Bristol City. But I mean, Arsenal have clearly been hit a lot harder than other clubs, and that's obviously going to raise questions. We know they're putting a lot into it, the research side of things now. The documentary that Mead and Miedemar did, really open the eyes into what Arsenal are trying to do, and obviously they're trying to cope with it. But it has to be said, Arsenal have just been hit harder than any other clubs, and that can just be luck as well as anything. You know, every club has been hit by it with top players missing out, but the volume that Arsenal have been hit by, and luckily now it's sort of one player out rather than four or five. It's a really scary reality for these players. You can only think of these academy players coming through as well. You know, the education I think is there for them at the moment because they've got to realize that you are at a greater risk than your male counterparts of suffering the injury. It's such a worrying time, isn't it, for those in women's football, but for those at Arsenal as well. I think there must be an even more of a burden at the moment.
Yeah, you hate to think that it comes across like a curse, but you can't help but think that, can you? Especially when we had, all of those players out at the same time. And also, if you think about the importance of those specific players to Arsenal, especially, obviously we had Mead, Williamson, Miedemar, Wienroither, obviously at Arsenal when it happened, and it sort of kept, you start to think, how does this keep happening to the same team again and again? And I think, we talk so much about how the women's game is growing and developing, and we're so glad, and for these young academy players, like where is the game going to be in a good way for them? And then we look at a situation like this and we think, actually, then there's still a long way to go, and there's still certain areas that we have to address. We talked about potentially, the scheduling issue, but if we think about growing the game and the development of football, realistically, that's something that's quite difficult to not be able to continuously have a lot of games being played. That's not something that you can necessarily change easily. And I feel like as the game grows, that's only going to develop. Obviously, we have, the things like the Club World Cup being discussed. And obviously people asking questions, well, where is that, when is that going to be played? So it's kind of like, how can we look at other areas as well and sort of address that? It could be, obviously, we looked at the boots that players are wearing. We really have to now focus down on what can we do that's realistic and possible and not just, speak it into existence. Actually, we want to see actions now. We want to see something happening to prevent this from, occurring in such a severe way at the minute.
Worth noting that there are so many factors as well, because you look at Pelova, who's obviously played so many minutes. When Leah Williamson did it, Beth Mead played such a lot of football. But then you turn to someone like Kayla Marquise, who's finished her Arsenal career with two appearances. I think she played five times for Bristol City before her injury, which really shows that for her, maybe it's not all about the scheduling, but also when we're sitting here not as experts, and even a lot of the experts on ACLs are still finding answers at the moment and are still trying to work things out because of just how much work there is to do on this injury. Looking at Pelova then as a player, she's obviously someone who maybe capitalized on some of those injuries, sort of the back end of the 2022-23 season when the likes of Leo Valti were out, when Leah Williamson obviously couldn't step into midfield as well. And she, and along with maybe Frida Marnham, really stuck a claim for themselves. In the Arsenal side last season, she was a top performer, wasn't she?
She really was. And I think that we all sort of looked at that and thought, how far she's come. Obviously, she had games where she just showed how good she really is. And I'm just thought, it makes it even more like disappointing in situations where you see how well a player's done over a season, how much they've grown. Obviously, going into an international game as well, you obviously want her to do well for her international team. It really is just, it's a really interesting one because when you have a player going out for an extended period of time, you obviously have to consider replacing them for that period of time, and then you want to also say, well, we want you to come back, we want you to get back in that side, obviously, if and when you recover from your injury. So bringing in a long-term replacement and somebody who is, a first team choice is quite a difficult thing to do because what do you do when she comes back from injury and then you've got too many options again? So I kind of think we really now have to look at who we've got in the team. We've got a lot of options in midfield. We've got a lot of young players who are extremely talented. Could this be a time for them to shine? Could be a case of Cooney Cross getting a lot of first team football and sort of cementing her place in that side? Could it be a case of obviously having, Little and hopefully Leah Volti coming back and then having somebody else playing in front, potentially Marnham, or having someone like Russo in that position. Obviously, we're bringing in potentially Mariona as well. It kind of really depends on how sort of Jonas sees his system without Pelova and if he's a like for like replacement, or actually if it's a case of let's see how we can shift certain players around. And then obviously, yeah, Cole as well. that could be an option. But only if she's going to get game time because that's quite important for her at this point in her career.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of her loan spell at Everton, but she is such a talented player. I mean, she's another one who played more minutes than we probably expected her to amidst all of those ACL injuries. But her ability on the ball is right up there in this Arsenal squad. I think the areas she's had to work on have sort of just been the physical side, maybe of the WSL, and I still think she maybe lacks a little bit of that intuition once she gets in and around the penalty area. I'm sure she'd like to look at someone like Frida and perhaps and look at adding a few more goals to her game. But I think she is going to be someone who can come back in. She knows the Arsenal system. She went to Everton because they're a club who play maybe a similar brand of football, and because Jonas Eidevall knows what he's going to get from her going and playing under Brian Sorensen. And I think it makes sense definitely for her to come back and play. We know that midfield, in terms of personnel, let's think as well, we might well be adding Mariona Caldente to that, who can play on that number 10 role. I think Arsenal have more than enough players in midfield to cover for Pelova. Unfortunately, she has been one of the top players, but I think Arsenal, they seem to be moulding their midfielders in this Arsenal way at the moment, in the veins of the likes of Little and Valti, which means all of these players who come in have these sort of similar characteristics. They can play a similar role and they know what's expected of them. I think all we've lacked with Arsenal is maybe that bit of continuity in midfield. There's often change. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, how the number 10 often seems to be changing. But when you do go down, you put all of the options down on paper. Cooney Cross is only getting better and better, and she's only going to benefit from more minutes. Same with Katrina Kuhl. There's a lot of excitement there because Little and Valti have been around for a while. We know exactly how good they are, but the players coming through as well, the younger players, the ones Arsenal have brought in, we know they're good enough, and I think this could be an exciting season in midfield. You know, with or without Victoria Pelova, it's a massive loss, but as we've talked about before, football is brutal, and it's going to present opportunities for some of these younger players. And I think Arsenal will be quite happy with what they've got. I'd be surprised if they make any moves.
I don't think so, especially when you look at, like you said, somebody like Mariona coming in. Obviously, we spoke about this. Versatility is what she brings to this Arsenal side. She can play on the left wing, she can play up front, but also there's definitely qualities in her that strikes number 10. Obviously, we expect most of the Arsenal squad to be staying the way that it is in terms of no big departures. So obviously we saw Frida have a fantastic season, the season previous when she really, really stepped up in people's absences. And I think potentially we could look at players like that. Obviously, we need to make sure that, we're building them, like you say, into this system and we're having that sense of continuity. We don't want to be bringing somebody in who plays a completely different position and changing everything around. And yeah, I think obviously we look at Pelova, what a fantastic player. We're not going to go in and say she's easily replaceable because that's not the case, but it is a case of trying to get the most out of those other players, but also getting that consistent system and building them into that the best that we can while she's obviously absent from the team.
Yeah, let's remember here the reason we've got so many midfielders is because so many players are out injured. So essentially, you're now the work that Arsenal have done to get these players into cover for others is that's now exactly what it's there for. Is because now you lose a key player and you've got the players to come in. That's squad depth. That's what the top sides in the WSL should have. And whereas before Arsenal have rightly had to scramble and bring other players in, they now shouldn't have that problem. And now, well, talking of ACLs, the next topic is someone who returned from one back in April in Laura Wienroither, and she's seems absolutely delighted that she's going to be continuing on at Arsenal. She's obviously had that 11-month absence, suffering her ACL against Wolfsburg back in May last year. She returned to action at Meadow Park against Bristol City, a really, really lovely moment. And she's going to be competing, Daisy, with Emily Fox on that right back spot. And that's some real quality and some strength in depth for Arsenal to look forward to, especially if they can get back into Europe this season.
Yeah, exactly what you were just saying about building that squad depth and sort of increasing that. That's exactly what we've got now, especially with Wienroither. I think obviously that you saw the reception that she received when she returned, and obviously in the last game of the season as well. She's a very, very much like she's very liked by the club, and she's sort of emphasized in her contract renewal video as well. I think she's a very, very good player, and I think we saw real glimpses of her, unfortunately, then getting injured. But even in that Wolfsburg game, if you remember, before she got injured, she played extremely well. And I think when you're going up to compete against someone like Emily Fox, it's not necessarily a bad thing, like you say, because we should hopefully have game time for like swapping like players around a lot more and trying to rotate and trying to, like you say, prevent any injuries and things like that. So I think let's try and get the most out of both players. Let's not think of it as a bad thing that we've got too many players in one position. Let's think of it as we've got different options in the same position, and obviously we don't. I've noticed Emily Fox does tend to come off as a substitute as well. So potentially later on in games, if we need a different option, we need somebody like Wienroither who will, get forward and bring that energy. That's definitely something that we could consider.
Yeah, no brainer of a move for Arsenal, really. We've seen Katie McCabe, at times have to shuffle across and play on that right back spot. Having Wienroither back is going to be a big help. How do you compare her and Fox then? Because obviously we've not had that opportunity to see Wienroither, but I think Fox has definitely made herself the first choice. That's safe to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we knew that, didn't we, when obviously we signed Fox, that was going to be a fantastic signing. That, they're both still quite young relatively. I think in terms of the system that we've seen Arsenal play, in terms of getting the fullbacks forward and trying to provide that overlapping or underlapping one into the box, that's something that both of them will, more than happy to do and will be there in the right place at the right time. So I think in terms of using your fullbacks in an attacking sense, that's something that they do extremely well. But I've also been impressed by Fox in general defensively. I don't think she's been weak in that area by any means. And obviously, when Wienroither comes back, it will be interesting to see also how she does in that role. But yeah, it's just nice to have the two players playing in the right position and not having to, like you say, same with midfield really, but also in the back line, playing players out of position just to fill that gap. So that's obviously nice to have two traditional, well, I guess it's traditional right backs or people who actually play in that position as an option.
Fiona Seideval said, I'm delighted that Laura has signed a new deal with us. She brings us real quality in the fullback position while her work rate and team spirit are just as important. She's worked so hard on her return to competition, and I'm sure she will continue to make a big contribution to the squad moving forward. Wienroither said, being back on the pitch with my teammates is a feeling I can't describe, and I can't wait for the next season to get started. It's such an incredible feeling for me to put pen to paper once again for the Arsenal. I'm so happy to remain at this club and to have the opportunity to continue playing for a football team that I consider home. There's such a real theme of home, isn't there, when we see these contract extensions and Arsenal getting their business done early. It's been another case of a player who's done a lot off the pitch as well and made the most of her absence with that ACL injury. She moved in with Miedemar and me, didn't she, for a bit as well. And I think just that home aspect again in terms of how the players have got around each other, and we can then link that back to Pelova and her recovery. But every player who's come back, has only praised their teammates and the club, it seems, for the work that's gone on behind the scenes while they've been making that recovery.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously that does play in, doesn't it, into how the team perform. Obviously, you want a team that is together, as we say, you want a team who supports each other on and off the pitch. Obviously, if you're going to build those relationships on the pitch, you need to make sure that you have those positive relationships off as well. And going forward, if we start to build that consistency under Jonas, he's obviously clearly building a squad that he, is starting to become his own players that he wants to stay, players that he wants to bring in. And it's so important that if we're gonna really do well next season, that we're gonna have that connection between players on and off the pitch, and obviously the fans as well play into what Arsenal is so much. And if the fans get behind you next season and we start to really build something good, yeah, who knows what we can achieve if everything falls into place. Obviously, not the best start with the Pelova news, but we know what this club is like. We will get together, we will support Plover, and we will obviously bounce back from that. And anyone who comes into this club is going to feel the exact same. I really think that most people that come to this club, get that impression straight away, and that's obviously what we want.
Well, finally, we are going to do a Pride Month special. We're going to record that later today, and that's going to be out next week. So we're going to mention Leah Williamson's her address at the Oxford University. We're going to do that later on for another episode. So we're going to finish here with the news of a USA tour. The Arsenal women, they have been to the US before for a friendly, but I think this is the first one that's been sort of branded as an official tour, a proper pre-season tour that's going to link in really with Arsenal men's tour of LA and Philadelphia at the end of July. Arsenal men playing Manchester United and Liverpool. Yona side of our side, they'll be playing NWSL's Washington Spirit and then playing Chelsea, who always need need no introduction, but they'll be playing under their new manager, Sonia Bonpastor. An exciting couple of games over in Washington, D.C. at Audi Field. August the 15th to the 26th, Arsenal are out there. The Chelsea game on Sunday the 25th, the Washington Spirit one a week earlier, Sunday the 18th. Arsenal will be training at George Mason University in Virginia, Emily Fox's home state, during their stay in the US. Exciting times. It shows just how big a product, I guess, Arsenal women have become, and also comparing it to last season, where our pre-season essentially was being knocked out of the Champions League qualifiers. This is going to be the ideal preparation.
Yeah, definitely. So many positives to take from this. Obviously, first of all, building on going to over to Australia, we really want to emphasize that we're going over to so many different places and sort of, yeah, seeing the fans over there and building that community and not just obviously playing games here. Obviously, in terms of getting that pre-season, we knew that that was going to be so important for Arsenal, especially if we want to build on what happened last year and not have the same thing happen again. We want to be able to play those games, and obviously two very difficult games for us. I know obviously it is pre-season, but we've got a Chelsea side where we don't actually know what to expect at this point. Obviously, Sonia will have to, build on these players that she's got, and she's going to be going into it quite brand new as well. So we'll get to see what we're going to expect from her from this season, and obviously a NWSL side that we don't get to play very often. In fact, we never probably get to play. So also a team that's doing quite well in the NWSL this season. Obviously they've got some great players. And yeah, that it'll be a really interesting test because we want to be able to play against different sides, don't we? To sort of, know that we can, no matter who we come up against, we're going to give them a good game, and obviously a chance for Jonas to decide kind of what he's going to do with his squad and this team this season.
It's big for Arsenal, isn't it? We know there's a massive American fan base for Arsenal as a club, and they do really get behind the men's and women's teams. I've really noticed that. Arsenal men were over there for a couple of friendlies last year in the US, having included Washington. Leif, the Gooner editor, was over there. I think he was going around on an e-scooter around all the Washington monuments, if I remember rightly. I don't think I'm going to make it over there this summer, but interesting to see manager Richard Garlick saying to take our women's team to the US for the first time on tour is another sign of great progress. We know from our recent trip to Australia that the interest and love for Arsenal women stretches far and wide. We want to build on that and bring our US supporters closer to the club. So great to see, isn't it? And I'm sure a few Arsenal fans will maybe travel over, crossing the pond and going out to DC for these two games. It's a really, really exciting time at the moment, seeing Arsenal women really becoming this global brand.
Yeah, we know what Arsenal fans are like, don't we? They will literally go anywhere that that team goes, and obviously really nice. I know that I've seen quite a lot of people, over on social media and in the groups who obviously live local or are going to travel from a different area of America to go and watch Arsenal. And for some of them, I can imagine that's probably maybe potentially one of the first games that they're going to get to. And if you stay up and you watch all these games at home on your TV, you really want everybody to get that opportunity to watch Arsenal women in person because it really is so different, isn't it, than watching it on a TV.
Hmm. Yeah, the games, talking of TV, are going to be streamed for free on DAZN, I understand, around the world. So good news for those. I think they're quite friendly kickoff times in the UK as well, by the looks of it, sort of a summer evening action, which is quite nice. So yeah, lots to look forward to there. Washington Spirit and Chelsea, two top teams in the women's game for Arsenal to play, and then they'll be back over. Well, we don't know quite where yet, but they'll have that mini tournament to try and qualify for the Women's Champions League for next season. Daisy, we'll leave it there. We'll talk again later to get this Pride Month special recorded. Really looking forward to that. Thanks for your time as always. Another week of sort of ups and downs for Arsenal women.
Yeah, it always is, isn't it? But yeah, that's the fun of this podcast. And yeah, we've touched on some exciting things, some disappointing things, but yeah, looking forward to filming the Pride special as well.